One thing I want to show you on this part right here is a lot of people ask, well, how big a tire can I fit with the cutouts, or what size lift can I fit, what size tire? Well, that all depends on what you're willing to do. So for me, my last stock Excursion, I had no lift on it, and I was running a 39.5 18 wide Mickey Thompson Baja belted on a 12-inch wide wheel, and all I had was a cutout, zero lift in the rear, and it was just about an 1.5 inch shackle lift hanger mount in the front. But so to give you a kind of an idea about what fits, this is a 42-inch semi-truck 22.5 inch tire. So you can see how the flare pretty much fits it pretty close. I've heard that they designed it around a 40-inch tire, and obviously this tire is going to be too big and it would hit if it was fully compressed. But I think about a 40-inch tire would be the maximum if you're going to try and compress it into the fender area. Alright, this is for the installation of Bushwacker extended cutout flares on the rear of an Excursion. What we're going to do first is we're going to mark the cut area with tape on the edge of the molding, and then remove the screws and nuts holding the molding on and get that piece removed. So we're going to start with that. Okay, when we get to this point, the back corner, the bottom corner, needs to be trimmed down. And to continue that arc of the tape to mark, we're going to mark 3.5 inches from the back of the fender edge all the way up and blend that in. Okay, what I'm going to show you next is I'm not going to do the normal pattern of just cutting it like I normally do. I'm going to cut it to show you what's behind the panels, to give everybody an understanding of how the body panels are put together, so you make the best determination of what kind of tools and how you want to cut it on your side. So I'm going to get that ready. So let me show you what's going on here first. So what I've done is I just cut along the outer edge of that fender seam all the way around to separate that outer panel from the inner panel. And then down here in the back, you've seen that I've already trimmed the lower portion, and then just up high enough so that when I pull this away, you can see where that bottom portion of the body rests. Open this up, and now what I'm going to do is I like to use tin snips to cut that outer arc, just so that I can take my time and do a nice cut. And that's the tools that I have that I'm going to use. So what we have is now that outer seam removed. This is where the original fender came down to. And as we cut that strip out, you can see it now has that inner part of the fender that comes down. What we're going to do is we're going to cut this up similar to how we do with the front in little strips, and then bend those tabs up flat to increase the opening. Now for the front, as we get down, we're going to need to cut this inner piece back so it's flush with this portion, and then take that up to meet the seam up here. So as we're cutting down, we're not actually going to go all the way to the front here, because that inner seam comes back here. So now I have to take the time to measure that inner seam from the back, and measure my lines up here, and then blend that in. Now you can see how that fender piece attaches the inner and the outer. Alright, so now you can see we've taken off that lip that was the bottom edge of the fender where the two pieces came together. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to cut pie slices this way to allow it to bend out and then come up and meet that gap as it goes around. Similar like what we did for the front. So now we got the pie cuts in. I'm going to start hammering out those tabs, try and kind of get it flush with the outer edge. The one thing different about the left side than the right side is the back corner of the body seam actually protrudes in farther than the passenger side, possibly for the gas tank fill area. They've redesigned it. But what we're going to do is hammer out, and as we hammer out we may need to cut in a little bit further. We don't want to cut in too far because then we're going to get into where the plastic fender won't cover it. So now I'm going to start hammering out those tabs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off these tabs flush with the outer edge of the body. We're almost there. So we cut off the outer body panel. We then trim the inner body panels, and now we've cut them flush so the tabs don't stick out past the edge. So this is what my seam ends up looking like. It's going to be flush with that flat spot here to the out. It's going to come flush all the way up and then transition to that outer mark, but that's going to allow us that plastic fender then to now ride up there and not have a huge gap. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to fill that with expanding flexible waterproof foam. Make sure you do get a flexible and waterproof foam when you're going to do that. You don't want it, something's going to attract and hold water. And then from there we're going to go ahead and set up our fender and get it marked to bolt on. Now the part that's going to be really tricky is this front portion. Now I have body cladding on the lower portion. I'm actually going to leave this in place and trim the plastic fender to go around it a little bit. But again, this is going to probably be the most difficult part right here, is getting the fender on, and we're going to line it up just like we would for the pickup bed. Get all the holes marked, bolt it on, not cut it yet. That's how I prefer to do it. Get it all lined up, get the bolt holes in place for the door piece. After that's done, then mark the upper seam and the lower seam, and then very carefully, and for me time consuming, try and get it as perfect as possible. Get the measurements right so that door seam cut in the plastic fender is going to be lined up properly, so that when we open the door it'll be great. What we're going to do is we're going to get the fender up in place, kind of make sure that our position is going to be right, and we're going to start marking the holes, getting them drilled. After we do that, we can install all the hardware. So we're going to start getting it put in position first. Okay, we're going to get the front portion of the fender fit flush against there. Also, it's got this little bump in the plastic fender. Let's see if we can, there we go, that needs to match and line up in the back. So the thing that I'm concerned about most is this gap is filled in properly, and the back of the fender is up against the back of that cut. And if you cut 3.5 inches off the back of the fender, that's exactly where you need it to be to have this fender pushed to the back, and then this seam lined up properly right there. And once you get that, these two lower bolt holes can actually be drilled and screwed in, and then we can work on all the others to get them in place. But that's going to be kind of your starting point. So now what we've got done is we've got the holes drilled in, we've got the screws bolted in. What I haven't done yet is put on the rubber gasket that goes right along here. I like to make sure that I can see the plastic and how it lines up when I'm getting it all done and screwing the holes in. But what we need to do now is work on fitting this portion. So I'm going to actually leave my molding, so I'm going to trim a little bit of the plastic to make it sit farther in. But this is how we're looking on the inside. And this area that I showed you that sticks out a little bit more than normal on the other side. So the passenger side is a lot less intrusive. So there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this off. And I'm going to put on the molding. What I'm going to do is that molding, lay it in the sun to warm up, make it a little bit more easy to maneuver. And then we're going to spend our time working on getting that front seam cut and aligned, put back in. But also after I take it off, I'm going to fill in the gaps. So I'm going to use my expanding foam. Alright, so I'm going to show you a little trick about how I kind of figure out where to cut the plastic. I'm going to make a cardboard template of the fender and then line it up, and it's good if you use the shadow of the sun or a lamp to get it right. So you can see, hopefully, I've marked the edge right here at the door seam when it was installed, and then with my template placed down and using the sun as a shadow, I was able to then establish the line with the shadow, if you can see that or not, I don't know, and then trace that edge of the shadow with the marker, and that leaves me the red line. So I think I might be able to see. I don't know if that shadow shows up or not. So now we're ready to cut that, and well, hope we didn't screw up a $500 fender.